This annotated bibliography is designed for you to learn something new, something that matters, something that's significant in the real world, to show what you learn, how you learned it, and why it matters. And if your paper isn't answering those things, you're going to want to add those details. And if the paper is not answering those things, chances are you're not going to get the grade that you want to. And so that leads to the question, how am I grading this annotated bibliography? So I want to talk about the rubric, and I want to analyze a student example in this process. By the way, you will not be able to see the student example except in this video. The slide deck will be there for you to see, but you won't be able to click on the link for the student example. So the paper itself is worth 200 points. 10% or 20 points is MLA formatting. Now I've provided a slide deck with details. You can click on that. You need to alphabetize your works cited page alphabetically by the first word, use hanging indentations. By the way, this must be MLA 8. I've been stressing that all semester, and every time I've given you feedback on your works cited page, I have given you that information. Let's take a look at this sample works cited page. The paper I'm looking at is actually a good paper. So everything you see, you're going to say, what grade would this student get? This is a B paper, probably on the lower side of a B, but it is a B paper. And I'm going to be talking about things this author could do to strengthen this paper, and we'll be looking at this paper throughout the video. So this is the works cited page, and the student is using MLA 8, except for one thing. You'll notice that I indicate the student should add the URL, DOI, and date of access, which are required. By the way, in the slide deck that I created, all of that is on MLA, all of that is explained. The other thing I want to indicate is that in your proposal, I asked you to create a works cited page and tell me why a source mattered, what you were learning from that. All of that can go away now because you've expanded in the body of your paper. So just cross that out. The final thing I want to mention is that make sure that you're including Barron and Grimm. The author of this paper is missing another source that they use in the introduction. Those are important things. You should cite every single source. If you use a hook with statistics, show where you get those statistics. If you describe a current event, you should add a source. Where did you learn that current event? Those are all important things to do. Back to the slide deck. I want to talk about using sources. I know it's not necessarily obvious, but yes, you do need quotations, paraphrase, and summary from the texts. Adding quotations, adding specifics says, hey, I'm not just making this up. Here we are. Make sure you introduce your sources, including where they were published, who the authors are, use the full name the first time, the authority of the authors, why are they even believable, the title of the text, the year when published, all of those things. When you use quotations, make sure you provide context, that you integrate it in your sentence grammatically, or use a single verb, that you provide analysis of that quote. We've done this work in class. You know how to do this. Yes, I know it's time consuming, but this is college. So yeah, basically your analysis should see of any quotation is what does the author mean? Why does it matter? What do you learn? That's true of any paraphrase is like, how do you know this? The author provides examples. If you don't have them, you're removing the context. Be super specific so you can answer those how, why, so what questions. So the introduction, and by the way, this is a description of the excellent paper taken from the rubric. The author uses a strong, engaging hook with real-world examples to introduce, provide cohesive background information on, and illustrate an important topic. The author defines or explains the term and uses Barron and Grimm, or Dees, Ozias, and Godby, adding specifics from the text which create a foundation for the rest of the annotated bibliography. Quotations are presented in context with analysis, and there's a project statement that indicates the direction of the annotated bibliography. Now, this is worth 50 points. That's 25% of your grade. Take some time on it. Let's take a look at this introduction. And this student is doing some good things with the introduction. There's a nice title. I would suggest that the author take this title and use systemic racism, or racism in America, a broken system. Why do I suggest that? Because anybody reading this is going to say, hey, there's a broken system, but they're not going to know that the topic is racism. So adding a colon, we've seen a lot of authors that do that so that they could provide a subject and a direction. So here's the hook, and I like the student's hook. For the first 90% of the United States' history, slavery or legal segregation has been in place. That means we have only been without slavery and segregation for 10% of our nation's history. Whoa, this is startling. I mean, like, think about it. There's a controversy right now. Is the US a racist nation? Is it not? And that started last week with Biden's speech and Tim Scott's rebuttal or response, and then Kamala Harris's response to the response. Is the US racist? I don't want to resolve that today, but this is really startling. 10% of our nation's history. So what I would suggest for this author is that concrete examples and analysis would be really valuable here. In fact, this whole introduction needs some concrete examples to illustrate the problems. The author says slavery also continued illegally after the Emancipation Proclamation. Actually, this was on the student's paper. I put, how do you know? Actually, it continued legally. The sharecropping system was established that allowed former slaves to work the land where they used to work as slaves. And the property owners, the plantation owners, would then sell the supplies, but they'd price it up so that however much money the Black people made, it was never enough to pay off their debt. And so they could never leave. Otherwise, they would be arrested, put in prison because they had reneged on a debt, and then they would be brought back to the land and forced to work to pay off their debt as prisoners. And so slavery actually continued legally after the Emancipation Proclamation. It's a pretty ugly history. But this is there, and the author needs to provide some details. How do you know? This is important information to consider because laws were put in place to reinforce these ideas that still oppress Black people today. And again, in what way? So we're still answering, how do you know, how, why, so what? The author's given us the so what, but we don't see the concrete examples. This oppression, and I think we could just take out oppression, but we could say this is systemic racism. And then the author provides Iris Marion Young's quotation. Anytime you've got a quotation, and this is a great quotation, there needs to be some analysis after it. And basically lots of how, why, so what. The author comes down to Barone and Graham, and this is the first mention of Barone and Graham. And you'll see my comment there. Again, quotations, who are they? What is their authority? They are discussing how systemic racism affects students. But there's no development and there are no quotations from Barone and Graham. All of this is really important because without those details, it's hard to see what are they saying, how are you adding to their conversation. This is the author's project statement, and I like this. I have explored 4 scholarly sources which study the history of systemic racism in the country. I will read these sources and then analyze and add to the discussion of systemic racism in higher education and ways to combat it. And it's important, I mean, like, this is a really good project statement, very, very clear. But in the discussion session, it's really important that whatever you do, you are developing that. You know, like, how are you adding to it? How does it affect higher education? And how can higher education combat it? When you say you're going to do something, it's important that you do that, and that should be sprinkled throughout your paper. Okay, back to the body of your paper is worth up to 90 points. 12.5% or 25 points for each of the first 2 sources, and then 10% or 20 points additional for up to 2 more sources. So total available is 45 points or 90, or 45% or 90 points. What kind of sources should you use in this section? Scholarly books, peer-reviewed scholarly journals, no dictionaries, no encyclopedias, no popular texts. This is the description of the excellent paper. In multiple paragraphs, the author analyzes deeper understanding of the topic from the source. The author introduces evidence for this deeper understanding using quotations in context with analysis. The author provides concrete examples to illustrate why this matters. Super important. Concrete details are your friend. Let's take a look at our sample paper. I had some comments in here. Oh, there they are. This is a scholarly book that the author chose. That was ambitious because it's really hard to get enough out of a scholarly book, but you can do that by skimming chapters. The danger of doing that is you might want to provide a big overview of what every chapter does or what the book is doing as a whole. And since it's not possible to read the whole thing in the time that you have for research, and this is going to be true for a lot of papers that you write at San Diego State, you might be surface level instead of concrete. And that's the challenge that the author has right now. The author's providing an excellent overview, but not a lot of concrete examples. So the author starts in a way that's not wrong, it's just less than what I'm looking for in the excellent paper. This book starts by reviewing the history of racial segregation in the United States, which is a what? But I would want the author to begin developing what they learn. So it might be something, a topic sentence that indicates what the author learned would be not hopeful, but helpful. For example, and then obviously introduce the text, the author. So American sociologist Joe Fagan's book, Systemic Racism, A Theory of Oppression, claims that focuses his analysis of racial segregation by talking about how America has been hypocritical from the very beginning, and has not upheld the founding fathers' claim that all men are created equal, since that really only applied to white men in America, and says this is the foundation of racial oppression. By the way, I'm making that up off the top of my head, but do you see how that is the main point? And the author can introduce the text and provide the main point, and now provide support for that. The author, in fact, here is that claim, and the author could have done exactly that. I wish I'd look at that. And then Fagan explains that the oppression of non-Europeans was made basic to a new society. And here's where we really want to see in what way, how. And then the author makes these claims by exploring the world of segregation through a white person's eyes and then through a Black person's eyes. There's no more details on that. And so that might be, if the author wants to expand on that, that would be useful. If the author doesn't want to expand on that, then that probably needs to go away. Here's where the author gives examples of the reality of systemic racism by talking about capitalism in America. And then the author could say, for example, Fagan explains how early capitalism was centered around the Atlantic slave trade, meaning our country was built on the back of slaves. And then the author says why the author talks about why this matters, what can be done to prevent it from getting worse, but we don't have those details. So for us as readers, we need to know, how is capitalism connected to the slave trade today? How was the country built on the back of slaves? Why does that matter today? What can be done to prevent systemic racism from getting worse? There's nothing about how systemic racism exists in the US today. He talks about ways to dismantle racism in the country. Again, how, why, so what? Here's the talking point, is increase the number of whites who are talking about it. How does that happen? Why does this matter? What is the price for change? How do we change it? And so the author definitely has a good overview, but not a lot of details. This section, I would give like a high C to, because of that lack of detail. Overall, the paper would get a B, but this section would not get that B mark. Let's go back to the slide deck. The conclusion or discussion section is a synthesis and application to the real world. This is worth 15% of your grade or 30 points. Multiple paragraphs, synthesizing key ideas. The author is specific and integrates quotations using necessary context. Excellent how, why, so what analysis. The author has a good outline for this. Based on my research, I have learned the specifics about how this country originally was built on the backs of Africans and is rigged to benefit white people. And I asked, what is the main point you are trying to make in this section, and why does it matter? You might start, as I review these 4 sources, I realize blank because blank. Now, keep in mind what the author said they were going to do. I'm going to talk about how it's present in America, today, how it impacts higher education, and how to overcome it. But there are no specifics here. I was able to see how clearly why systemic racism continues to affect students and color and faculty of color in higher education. No details, no so what. Or the author might start with these 4 sources illustrate 3 main points that show the continuing of presence of America in America and in higher education, first of all. And that would allow the author to add those statistics. Yeah, stay on the project statement, stay on the details, add those details, be specific. Again, it's the how, why, so what, and the details. The author has the outline there, but without the development. And again, it's a rough draft. So it's a rough draft. 10 points, or 5% of your grade, is the editing word choice. Excellent word choice, minimal editing errors. That will get you the full 10 points. And this student definitely got those full 10 points. I hope this is helpful for you to see what a student is doing. A student is doing a very good job, but can ramp it up. Again, it's a rough draft. I didn't expect any rough drafts to be polished at this point. Remember, your paper is due Thursday. And quite honestly, I expect some of the papers to come in a little after that, and that's totally fine. I take them all the way till May 12 without any penalty. At that point, the link closes because it's the end of the semester and it's time for me to grade and get your points back, your grades back to you. Send me questions, visit me during office hours. Yeah, that's it. Talk to you later. Bye.